Okay, everybody. Thank you for joining us at our June 4th Planning, Economic Development, and Land Use Committee meeting. Today, we're going to be taking up Ordinance 68-121-24. Can staff please do roll call?
Valerie.
Here.
Owie.
Here.
Adams.
Present.
Clark.
Here.
Zamer.
Here.
We're also joined by council members Keegan and Anane. For city staff, we have City Clerk Shaniqua Jackson, Legislative Director Brian Jimenez, Junior Policy Analyst Alyssa Kamara, and Principal Planner Avi Epstein.
Okay. Thank you all for joining us today. Do we have any comments from the public?
Next up is Karen Cuniff.
How many people do we have in total?
6.
Okay. So we're going to give everybody 3 minutes, please, and if you just state your name. You can go.
Good evening. My name is Karen Cuniff. Do you need my address or no?
Sure.
Okay, I live on Croswell Street in Albany, and I'd like to just make a few comments about tonight's meeting. I'm a little late coming to the meeting in the fact of I didn't find out about this ordinance until maybe a month ago. I didn't find any public notification, so as a suggestion or perhaps some enrichment to the community, let us know where ordinances or issues like this are coming so people can inform themselves. So, excuse me. The reason that I've heard for approving the request for the ADUs were 3. One was to assist family members or loved ones that need care. The other one was people wanting to help pay off their mortgages, and another was for need for housing in Albany, both affordable and just regular housing. So my response to the allowance is no. After families no longer require care, there's an 800-foot shanty in someone's one-family lot. The cost of living in Albany is high, as it is in all of New York State, but we all have to deal with it and pay our mortgages as we see fit. I think that allowing someone to utilize that portion of their yard or their garage does a disservice to their neighbor. So I don't think that's the best solution for housing. I think that in looking at ADUs, you should consider the impact that is going to be affecting the neighboring properties. It's going to devalue properties, and it may even increase their assessments. And I don't think that that is fair to homeowners to have ADUs next to them. So Albany should look at its abandoned housing and buildings and restore them to livable structures rather than try to put shanties in people's backyards. I think that that's a better solution, and it's a more welcoming solution to people that want to come to Albany rather than having a little box to live in. You might have a full apartment. So I don't think the city has the ability currently to enforce its codes in different living situations. So to add more ADUs is only going to burden them further, and they're going to be further behind in trying to enforce the codes that we currently have. So I just think that if you yourself look out your backyard, door, driveway, look to the left, look to the right, and there are 800-foot units in your view. I don't think that's what you signed up for. That's not what I signed up for. And,
Ma'am, you got 15 seconds.
okay, I'll be very quick. I'm just requesting that you refrain from voting on this ordinance until the rest of the public can be adequately informed and allowed to weigh in on it or vote on it. I appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Our next speaker is Karen Shupak.
Oh, now it is. Whoa. My name is Karen Shupak, and I live on South Pine, and I own a business called the Albany Art Room. It's been in business for 17 years, and it's on New Scotland Avenue. So 2 of you represent me. I'm going to read a little thing I wrote. It's short. Single-family home zoning aims to preserve a particular quality of life within the city. However, historically, it was part of a series of rules, laws, and regulations, such as redlining, designated to enforce racial segregation. The effect of our current zoning regulations is to lock in patterns of racial segregation. Allowing ADUs to be added to properties in neighborhoods dominated by single-family, owner-occupied homes is one small step toward overcoming this legacy by providing greater choice of housing types and locations to people who have had very little consideration in the development of housing. I am strongly in favor of allowing accessory dwelling units in Albany.
Thank you, ma'am.
Our next speaker is David Nelson.
Hello, my name is David Nelson, and I live here in Albany on Van Buren Street. I think that, well, first of all, I'll say straight off, I support ADUs. I think that we've had a lot of discussion in the country over time about how to solve something, and we've become confused and then thought we had the answer, then we became confused, and so on and so forth. And there's been a lot of back and forth talk. But increasing housing stock is certainly part of the answer. Also, the affordability continues to be an issue, and last I checked, and it's been true for years now, there's not a single truly affordable county in the entire United States. With that knowledge, maybe we could think critically, but also with our hearts, because we can't just expect people to pull themselves up by their invisible bootstraps. I think that it'd be fine to put accessory dwellings in the backyard. We have building codes right now. We have requirements in the document you gave us today and through email. And I think that it would not be difficult to describe all the protections that are in place. And it may be difficult to regulate and to inspect things, but it's already true that this is difficult to keep up with. So we could say, because we don't have the true capacity we need to do everything as well as we'd like as far as inspection, that we should just not do it. I feel that's not a very good argument, because that situation exists in a fairly constant state in many communities. So why don't we do what's best and actually put some form of solution forward that we can actually make a difference doing, rather than picking at things that are potential reasons not to, but don't really explain either the situation, the need, or the morality of our decisions. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Kim Johnson.
David and I were together, so hold on. Thank you.
The next speaker after that, Daniel Platt.
Good morning, everybody. Morning, good evening. Dan Platt, 187 Elk Street. So first, I'm generally supportive of ADUs across the board. So my comments are mostly towards kind of providing some more context. I did some SNAP research on my own. First off, so interesting to note, in Seattle and Portland, when they deregulated these, and it is sort of, this policy is lumped into sort of a deregulation of housing. But because this ordinance includes the owner-occupier requirement and this is not for Airbnb's requirement, I believe that will prevent a lot of the abuses to the public realm that people are concerned about. And I think it should be noted that this should not be seen as a solution, maybe a partial solution to the housing crisis. I think at the end of the day, we might see maybe 20 to 30, if this is done, maybe 20 to 30 and the city will even do this. But that will be 20 or 30 more studio apartments at below market rate, because what was seen in studies across the board, or at least the reports I looked at, were that these ADU units are always for low or moderately low income people. A good portion of them are in fact rented to friends and family of the owners. So it's not really like for a big market boost. But, for example, if I wasn't able to rent a $500 one bedroom from my parents, after college I would have been SOL. Or I've been in other kinds of big trouble, crisis. Like so many people I know are also housing insecure. So every little bit helps, and it's more towards, I think we'll see a small impact from this, but the impacts that is that it will increase the number of studios, and it's generally good to, let's see. And if it's, generally good, but otherwise, if the concerns from outer neighborhoods are that it will hurt certain neighborhood characteristics, then maybe in those zoning areas, we make it a conditional use and not a across-the-board approved, but that's just a proposed compromise. So otherwise, I'll keep my comments there, and I'll see you on the flippity-flip.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Bruce Mistorovich. And this will be our final speaker for tonight.
Hi, my name is Bruce Mistorovich. I live at 883 Warren Street, and I just wanted to come out and speak for a moment to speak in support of the ADU ordinance. I think especially kind of in the federal situation we're dealing with right now with tariffs and deportations, I think kind of the traditional construction is going to have like material and labor shortages, so having these smaller units that people can build with less material that they can kind of do more of the work on their own kind of DIY style, I think is going to be a way that we continue to build more housing in a kind of a tough market to do that. So I'm really excited to see this bill out here, and I hope you pass something. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, and thank you to all the public who came out to speak on this issue. Now we're going to start discussing the bill. I'm going to allow the sponsors to go first, and then I'm going to ask planning if they can discuss some of the updates that they've made in the last few weeks. So who would like to speak first? Megan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to note for the committee that there were some concerns brought forth by Councilmember Conti on the legislation. And Owusu and I agreed to make some minor language tweaks that addressed those concerns. And then I just wanted to respond to the individual that came in this evening saying they had just learned of the legislation and had significant concerns about the bill. You know, we do post all of our committee meetings and agendas in advance of those meetings on our website as well as our social media pages. I can't speak to how other council members handle their districts, but I myself certainly send out a newsletter letting everyone know what legislation has been introduced, what the bill does. If it's a controversial piece of legislation, I will discuss what both sides are concerned about in terms of that legislation. In terms of the bill itself, I think the concerns that folks have about every backyard in Albany being filled with an accessory dwelling unit that is separate and distinct from the property is highly unlikely, particularly given the land space that we currently have. We are a city. Most of our lots are fairly dense. The building of additional square footage onto a property is really dependent upon whether or not you have available land space on your lot to do so, because the bill does restrict and set forth limits as to how much can be built on a particular lot. That does not preclude, however, folks from being able to convert a basement or a portion of their existing home or an existing structure on the property into an accessory dwelling unit. They will be required to comply with all of the state's building codes and regulations, as well as all of our local codes and regulations with regards to these structures. So for it to be a housing unit, it has to have a kitchen, it has to have a bathroom, it has to have appropriate fire exits. Folks are going to have to run out electric and sewer and water to these units, all of which would be extremely cost prohibitive if you're looking at converting a garage or building an additional separate dwelling unit from an existing home or property. When we look at the rollout of ADU legislation nationwide, it is not the end-all and be-all of fixing the housing crisis. There have been some moderate successes in places like Los Angeles, but it is not the only thing that we need to be looking at in the city of Albany in terms of addressing our housing crisis. What it does is provide us an additional tool for us to have in our toolbox. And I believe that Councilmember Anane and I were both strongly in agreement. I mean, part of this has to do with the impact of single-family zoning on how and who gets to live in certain places. I think it's incredibly important that we start to dismantle those regulations that led to significant housing segregation, which is a problem here in the city of Albany. When you look at population density and you look at the population breakdown by race, we are an extremely segregated city. And it is extremely problematic for us here in the city of Albany. And those are all the comments I have on this legislation this evening. Thank you.
Councilmember Anani?
Yeah, thank you, Councilwoman. I don't know how to follow that up. Could essentially sum up most of the remarks that I was going to make. Again, we are in the middle of a housing crisis, and ADUs have the potential to benefit the city in so many ways. While they include detaching the structures as many pictured, they can also be attached or within a single unit dwelling. These different types of ADUs offer flexibility so that those that can't afford to build an entirely new structure or convert a garage can still have an ADU within their dwelling at a significant lower cost. There's been notions that ADUs are going to eliminate single unit zoning districts. That is not true. Rather, they provide an appropriate housing solution for our city by being of limited size, a max of 800 square foot, and only allowed in a rear yard if detached. They must also meet height setbacks. It provides for coverage requirements, meaning that not every lot will be eligible to construct as such on a structure. It's important to note that ADUs are one of the main tools, again, like Councilmember Keegan said, the main tools we have to help our older population age in place, stay near their loved ones and friends, and remain independent. As our city and our region as a whole continues to age, this will become a more pressing issue. There's been a lot of shifts all across our city, particularly with demographics in Albany, show a clear change from a larger household size to smaller ones, and from traditional family households to non-traditional households. Smaller household sizes mean we need more units for the same number of people and population. So again, this is the right thing to do, and the challenge, especially when the housing crisis, again, was mentioned, it's not the end-all be-all, but I believe that it's a step in the right direction. The state is already acting to give incentives to individuals who build some of these new accessory dwellings. The county is already planning on passing legislation probably at the end of this month to give some incentives for individuals who decide to participate. So again, this is a win-win, and I believe that we have to continue to support housing any way that we can. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to have planning, if you just come, give us a brief update on, I know there's some changes that were made based on some recommendations. If you just share that with the body and just where we are today.
Yep. Yeah, good evening, everyone. Ali Epstein with the Planning Department. So the main changes made to the provision in front of you were essentially just to clarify a couple of elements based on comments we got. One of them was to remove the word detached in the first subparagraph of section 2, I believe, so that it now reads, then an accessory dwelling unit has to be secondary to a single unit dwelling as opposed to a single unit detached dwelling. The difference that this makes is it would allow a building type that might be classified as a townhouse, but that has one unit, to also be able to provide an accessory dwelling unit. If the code were to say detached dwelling unit, it means townhomes or buildings that have certain setback requirements in certain districts might not or would not qualify for an accessory dwelling unit. So based on a lot of the research that we had looked at previously, also comments from several of the planning board members who were in favor of initially removing the detached section as well, we think it would be appropriate to expand the provision for accessory dwelling units to include townhouses. So the easiest way to do that is by removing the word detached. That aligns with a lot of the codes in the area. Troy also would be a good example of this, where they don't have townhouse as a use, but it's more or less a building type. The other provisions in the code, so we would keep the definition the same, and I think there was just a correction to where it says accessory dwelling unit in the first paragraph, where it was mistakenly underlined, and now it's, because it's already existing, so that was removed. I don't know if I missed anything. Okay.
Okay. Questions from committee members? Councilwoman Zamer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question, Avi. Like, talking about a townhouse or an attached townhouse with one unit, how do you have an ADU in there? Would it be, do you mean like a separate apartment? Or would a homeowner have the freedom to organize that unit in such a way? And would they have to have their own electric service?
Are you referring to if it's within or if it's
within,
detached?
Within.
I mean,
If it was a basement, that would be like an apartment, which is different from an ADU.
so it'd still have to meet the same, it couldn't be any larger than 800 square feet if it were to be an accessory dwelling unit. So in most cases, a townhouse could or would likely just have a second apartment as opposed to an accessory dwelling unit. So if we think of it as a 2-unit apartment versus a townhouse that has a single unit and an accessory dwelling unit, I think most would typically be considered a 2-unit dwelling or 2-unit dwelling townhouse, because they're probably going to have that second unit that's larger than 800 square feet, or the manner in which someone accesses the property. Part of the reason to include it, though, is that not all townhouses are located in zoning districts that would allow for a two-family as of right. So this kind of allows those properties to utilize it, their single-unit townhouse now as a single unit plus the accessory dwelling unit, if that makes sense.
Okay, so this would allow for a townhouse that is not in a zoning district that allows for a two-family to create another rentable living space.
Yes. I mean, if they could do the same thing if they were in a zoning district that also allows for a 2-unit or a 3-unit, but I don't see any reason why someone would do that as opposed to just converting it to a 2-unit that they could also make larger and that they don't have to confirm is owner occupied on a, every other year.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions from committee members? Councilmember Hyde.
Just to clarify, so I know the requirements aren't in this law, but because it falls under definition of dwelling unit, that accessory unit has to have its own kitchen, bathroom, everything, right?
Correct, yep.
Because that was one of my concerns, that we didn't actually have any conditions around what actually had to be in place, but I think because we have that general dwelling unit definition, it has to have its own separate rooms and such, yeah.
Yeah, so it would be covered, I guess the point being it's not included in this provision because there's already the existing definition of accessory dwelling unit, which I don't have in front of me, but it does state like its own separate housekeeping unit, I think is how it's referred to, which we have defined in the code too. And to your point, we also have the dwelling unit defined in the code.
Okay. Did planning look at setting a minimum square footage? I know we have a maximum square footage, but I've seen other codes that say it has to be at least 300 square feet.
We did not. Most of the best practices out there tend to keep the minimum open because there is already, based on the state and the city building code, there's habitable space requirements. I believe for Albany that would be like 185 at a minimum, and in most cases it's typically more than that, just based on the technical aspects of how you have to construct it. So you'll probably end up looking at something that's closer to 300 square feet at a minimum anyway.
Okay. Not so much a question for planning, but overall, since the last meeting, I've expressed at the last meeting I had concern about codes. We've got a requirement in here that one of the units has to be owner occupied. I think even at best intention, you set something up for your parent and the next owner is going to sell it, and it's going to be both are going to be rented out, and we're not going to be able to track that. And then I still have serious concerns about detached units, although I don't think anyone's actually going to be able to construct it. So, we get told we're in a housing crisis, and this is so important, but I just don't see from cost, from lot size, maximum lot coverage, setbacks. So like the same reason why I shouldn't be concerned, I just don't see it actually occurring. So I don't know, I'm a little bit, that's just a comment from me that even if it does go through, I just don't see anyone actually being able to do it, so I don't know what we're solving. That's all. Thank you.
If I can just respond to that, I think I don't remember who made the point, but the idea being that ADUs are just one part of the missing middle housing solution. It's not, silver bullet to anything, but I think to your point, we did do an analysis of a couple streets just at random in terms of impervious lot coverage and some other requirements to see like how many within a block would be able to build a detached accessory dwelling unit. Specifically looking at some of the areas we know where there are more concerns. So looking at the lowest density zoning districts, the vast majority of those on a block, over 80% would not be able to have an accessory dwelling unit. They're well over the existing impervious lot coverage already. In the case where there were a few that could technically have a dwelling because they weren't over the 30 or 40%, they only had about 3% left, so it wouldn't, they'd be building a structure that's like 180 or something square feet. So I think to your point, there's There probably won't be a lot of construction of detached accessory dwelling units, but we have gotten some people that have come to the office looking to construct accessory dwelling units where they would have met all the other standards except for it not being permitted right now. And we get a couple of those a year, but not many.
Yeah, no, thank you for that additional. And it's more just for the record that, you know, even to the extent people have these concerns, I just, you know, with everything else in place, I just don't see it necessarily happening. So that's all. But thank you for the additional.
Thank you. Councilmember Hurley?
Thank you, Chair. Avi's here, and I want to ask him questions, but I have other concerns I've been taking when we had the sponsors speaking and some of the comments from the public. So can I deal with Avi right now and then come back again with some other questions? So Avi, I just got one big question for you. We have changed this to the biennial review to make sure that it is owner occupied. When this was done, does codes agree with that, and will they be able to do that? Do they realize that we made this change, or is this something we got to let them know, you know, after this meeting? Can't do it now.
Yeah, I don't want to speak on behalf of Rick or anyone from the building department, but as far as I'm aware, they are aware of the change, and we've talked about it more in passing, so I believe that it's not an issue because they would typically be doing these inspections regardless, which is why we tried to time it kind of in sync with one another.
Okay, when you said they're going to do inspection, are you talking about the ropes, or are you talking about, because if they're relatives, they don't have to do that inspection. So I'm just curious how that'll work, or is that something we need to bring in, bring in codes to explain to us how they're going to do it?
I mean,
they're in the same building. That's why.
Yeah. I don't know exactly how they go about doing it or what the schedule is. But in this case, if it required every 2 years, you know, we have various applications where there's requirements to go out and do the inspection in certain timeframes. So this would follow the same, you know, practical rules. In terms of their ability to do it, I'd have to let, you know, Rick or Faye respond to that.
Now, is that something you can, like tomorrow at work, if you're at work tomorrow, talk to Rick and get back to the committee to let us, to let us know that you're going to be able to, you know, how in fact it's going to work? Because what I want to see, you know, before all this, before I can vote on it, I want to know step by step. Joe Public, I come in, I get a permit, or I want to know exactly the steps to be able to do the ADU so that we're all on the same page. I know what sometimes is very frustrating when I hear, well, we don't have to worry because not too many people are going to do it. But we're changing the actual law. And whenever you do that, the stuff that we don't see, and in fact, I had asked the sponsor, could we do a pilot for a couple of years? And first he agreed, and now all of a sudden he doesn't want to do it because we don't know some of the problems that might pop up. And maybe no problems will pop up. But I am very concerned, and I know a lot of the people where I live are concerned too, that we're not just putting legislation out there and, you know, opening up, making it the Wild West. So if you can get us that information, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd be happy to follow up with that. I did speak to Corporation Counsel about that piece, and they didn't believe there was any issue from a legal standpoint or from like an enforcement standpoint.
Councilmember Clark.
Ivy, just a specific drafting question again. So we have it now listed that they're permitted in every zoning district except for the special purpose districts. But we also have a requirement that this use shall be accessory to a single unit dwelling, and single unit dwellings are only permitted in R1L, R1M, R2, RM, RV, MUNE, MUFC, MUFM. So, you know, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 districts where single units aren't permitted, and we're allowing accessory dwelling units that must be accessory to a single unit dwelling.
So the distinction there would be, I believe what you're referring to in the permitted use table is single unit detached dwellings. So the detached are only allowed within certain districts, but a single unit dwelling isn't necessarily prohibited from being in some of those other districts that you were referring to. There's also a lot of non-conforming properties, whether single unit detached or just a single unit in a non-detached building that are in existence now that this could be applicable for.
Okay. I don't know if I follow that, but.
So just the single unit detached is what's regulated more strictly in terms of it not being allowed, let's say, in certain mixed-use districts, right? Because you don't necessarily want detached buildings where you're trying to have them closer to the frontage, but a single unit dwelling doesn't necessarily have to be a detached style of the building. So I think there's kind of the use or how a property is being used in the sense of like a single unit dwelling, a 2-unit dwelling versus a single unit detached dwelling, which is talking about the use and the building style.
But with the way this is written, a 2-family, if they met all the other requirements, wouldn't be able to have a accessory dwelling?
Correct. Yeah, this would just apply to a single unit.
Yeah. So I mean, again, when we're looking at the city as a whole, it's severely limited where these are actually going to be permitted.
Well, there's quite a large percentage of single unit dwellings, whether attached or detached, that exist in pretty much all the zoning districts currently.
But what's an attached single?
It would be more like a townhouse style. It's largely based on how much separation there is, from an actual measurement between the building's sidewalls and the property boundary. And that differs from district to district too.
So a townhouse that only has 1 unit?
Say again?
So a townhouse that only has 1 unit as opposed to multiple apartments?
Right, like you could have a building style of a townhouse that has multiple units. In our code, it is kind of handled almost both ways in a sense, where we have townhouse also as a use, just because City of Albany has so many townhouses. So like you don't want to be constructing necessarily detached, large lot, single unit dwellings in, if you were to think like on Lark Street or something like that, right? You're constructing townhouses. So there is similarities and distinctions, I guess, between both like the use in terms of how many people and then the building style. But by removing the word detached here, the intent was to let it be applicable to properties that are single units, but also a building style of a townhouse.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep.
Questions from committee members? Councilmember Hoey?
Yeah, and I apologize, a couple more things came up, Avi. The item 3, the Roman numeral 3, lots containing, it deals with the Airbnbs. It says here tourist or transient use. How is that going to be enforced? Right now, we don't have a bed and breakfast, an Airbnb, or any Verbo. We don't have any type of legislation right now for that. But what's the city, how are they going to know if I put up an accessory dwelling unit and I'm renting it out? Who's going to know? How are you going to enforce that or make sure that that doesn't happen?
Yeah, so it could be as simple as, the owner having to provide an affidavit or attestation saying that they're not doing that, which is typically how pretty much every municipality would deal with such an issue, and then you would enforce it based on, non-compliance or inspections. A lot of the platforms do have their data available, so that is information where, we are able to go through if something were to come up or if there's a complaint. Then I do know that the state, I haven't seen it yet, but I do know the state's working on being able to provide the information from the various short-term rental platforms to the county and to the individual cities. So we will have that information to, help with the enforcement matters as well.
Okay, and maybe neighbors will report it too. I mean, I'm dealing with Airbnbs now, and I tell people I can't do anything about it. And that leads into my second question. I brought this up before. Can you talk about, since you're in planning, parking. And again, I don't know other wards. I know my ward, the 15th. I know we have a problem on Russell Road. There is no parking on Russell Road right now, and I know people are renting out. A father bought his son a house, and 10 lacrosse players were living in the house. We do have legislation where the codes can go in about the density, the number of people, but each one of these people had cars, and they were parked. Russell Road's a very thin road. It's a part of a county road. We had almost a couple accidents occur, but that's just one road. I want to know, what are we going to do in areas where we don't have on-street parking? I can tell you Miller Avenue, for example, there's no on-street parking. Tudor Road, there's no on-street parking. If people put up an accessory dwelling unit, what do we do about parking? How do you, in a planning sense, how are we going to handle that?
Yeah, you know, pretty much all the research has shown that accessory dwelling units are actually one of the better, if not best, housing solutions for relieving the parking issue, because they generate significantly less, on average, they generate significantly less demand and need for parking spaces than a traditional either single dwelling unit or multifamily units. Part of that's due to the nature of who is often occupying an ADU. They're more often than not occupied by whether it's traditional family or non-traditional family, but someone who's already a part of that household unit that's there, so you're not necessarily adding a vehicle. I mean, you don't always know, but from the information we were looking at, the numbers overall are less than your typical vehicle demand. The other thing to note is a lot of the properties that we'd be looking at do tend to have driveways, certainly not all of them, but generally when you're adding, you know, what I would call like gentle density, you're able to reduce the overall impact or need for additional parking, because it provides generally better transportation networks, you know, over the course of time. This has specifically been shown in a lot of the larger cities on the West Coast where they've introduced ADUs and gentle density. They're able to reduce the, I guess what they would call like induced demand or need for additional vehicles and vehicle parking spaces. So there's no, you know, it doesn't necessarily address it for every property in particular, but a lot of, you know, can also say that there's a shrinking percentage of younger people who are driving as well, and which I think is generally a good thing, and more reliance on public transportation.
Well, you know, and I'm going to respectfully, I don't know if you've been up in the 15th Ward. That's, you know, we're doing a lot of assumptions here. We're assuming that it's going to be rented out to family members, which I love the idea. By the way, I would love to see single-family homes putting in an ADU within the existing building, where my really pushback is putting up a building behind, and somebody referred to it as a shanty. I don't want to see that. I don't think we're ready for that. I don't think we've done enough research. This is being pushed through, you know, we've been dealing with this, what, 4 or 5 months? It's, you know, there's a lot of questions got brought up. But the parking, you know, to me, it's a big problem. You say, well, we have public transportation. If you live down in the 15th Ward, down Russell Road, if you live down on Elliott, it takes 20 minutes to walk to about the nearest bus stop. And we don't have sidewalks. I mean, people, even students coming in and renting, they come with cars. I'm just explaining to you. We've had 10 cars parked. I got pictures. I had to give it to Rick LaJoy. He had to go and inspect it. So are we opening up Pandora's box without coming up? We've talked about this at the last meeting. Colony has the ADUs, and I'm reading on Nextdoor and stuff. Oh, well, Colony's doing it, but they have a requirement of 2 parking spots. Now, is that practical for downtown? No, it's not, and I understand that. I also want to bring up, I was going to bring this up later, we have a big mayor's race going on right now, and on Spectrum News, they did the debate last week. They asked all 4 candidates what they thought about ADUs. They all agreed that we need them, but they said it should be up to the neighborhood. And we got to look at this as a neighborhood type of thing. It's one size doesn't fit the whole city, okay? There are different sections. There's more suburban areas of the city, there's more dense downtown areas of the city. And when we start thinking about it, and I heard one council member saying, well, this is all about redlining and stuff. I don't know anything about redlining. All I know is I bought my house, I worked 3 jobs to be able to afford the house. I lucked out getting it when I did, but you know, I think we really need to look at this neighborhood by neighborhood. And you know, downtown, yes, we already have a parking problem. We have a permit system in there, but you know, I am bothered, and I don't know if we really thought this out. And you know, that's my opinion. I'm only 1 out of 15 on this council, but I got to represent the people, and if somebody comes to me, I can say, watch the video, which I've done already with people questioning me, what's going on with these ADUs? Because you got to listen to these meetings to understand what's going on. So I don't know, I really don't think planning has really thought out the parking type of situation. I know you can say, yeah, yes, less young people are driving, but I don't see it. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I live in that exact ward. I travel by public transportation. And part of the reason is when you require additional parking and you continue to set minimums, you're increasing the need for said parking. So when you start to reverse that a little bit, as trends have shown throughout cities across the country, you can, it takes time, but you can reduce the overall demand for parking and for vehicles in general. You know, I think to the other comment just about trying to deal with it on a, you know, neighborhood by neighborhood basis, we've done a lot of research into this. It's pretty universally accepted from like best practices standpoint to allow accessory dwelling units more in a preemptive sense. So, you know, zoning is in many ways, or can be used very exclusionary. So when it's set as a more neighborhood by neighborhood basis, you just end up excluding it from the areas that often could use the missing middle housing solutions the most. There's a lot of research showing, you know, discretionary reviews instead of administrative reviews tends to lead to more exclusionary policies. You know, just in terms, I think it's important to understand too, like the context and history of zoning in the city of Albany. Like for most of the history of Albany, we did not have zoning. There was no single family. There were no requirements or regulations against accessory dwelling units. We used to have more of them in the city. In about 1924, when the first zoning code was introduced, that was largely, and in many ways directly, a response to a lot of, you know, to wanting to prevent certain peoples and certain densities in certain areas. But even in the 1924 code for the city of Albany, you'd still be allowed 6 dwelling units on the average single-family zoned lot today. So, and that was true up until about the mid-60s. So, you know, it's changed a lot over time. I certainly understand people's perspective of like, you know, wanting to maintain a certain character, but largely that's part of what is beneficial about an accessory dwelling unit is it's more often than not, it's interior, so it's not seen. There are provisions in the code that prevent, you know, changing the building so that it changes the character. There's also design requirements that would be applicable to the accessory dwelling unit if it were to be detached. And I think, you know, again, it kind of is addressed in a sense on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis. If you think of different zoning districts have different regulations for the impervious lot coverage. So there's a different regulation for downtown versus a single family zoning district. So there's a lot of, and you know, also with the setback and height requirements, those can differ too based on the underlying zoning districts.
Thank you. And again, I think that's, you know, it's where I have a problem is the shanty in the backyard. And, you know, somebody made a comment, well, guy can build it himself and stuff, but we're going to need to really make sure that things are done right, that we don't have people breaking fire codes. I have this building up at 1211 Western that's been, I asked this council for help to stop it some years ago, and I had some support, but not a lot. And now we have that building up there, and who's going to pay to take it down because it was built without fireproofing. So I think that we got to tell, unfortunately, our society, we wait for a tragedy to happen before we start putting regulation in. And this isn't to prevent people from living. And again, I am strongly, if a parent wants to have their child live with them, or you know, a younger person wants to have their parents live with them, I think we should allow that. It should be within the thing. But when you start talking about putting a building in the back, where now you have to run electricity, you have to run sewer, you have to, you know, what about insurance? We haven't even talked about that. You know, does the house insurance cover that building in the back? You know, 800 square feet, and what was brought up, okay, that's kind of small. My camp up at Grafton is 600 square feet, 2 bedrooms, bathroom. It's quite big. I could live up there at 600 square feet, but we're talking about a 24-foot high building. That's not a small, tiny house. That's a 2-story building. And, you know, the argument that, well, you know, we want older people to be able to stay there. If they're having trouble getting up the stairs now in the main house, you know, putting a 2-story, there's a lot of little things here that really bug me on it. But again, I'm drifting all over the place, and I apologize. But thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess just a few things to highlight, just listening from the remarks made from other council members as well as people who spoke this evening. Some of the thoughts that came to mind, just piggybacking off of Councilmember Hoey's comments in regards to like the enforcement part. You know, it's a application permit process that I think most housing organizations use, where just like you have Albany Housing, when a tenant gets approved for Albany Housing for a voucher program and they are a single individual or a family of 2 or 3, that information is provided to, I guess in this situation, maybe the city, for us to review to make sure that that person, homeowner, is in fact renting to a family member by, again, having the necessary information filled out. That way, throughout the enforcement process, there's a recertification process to make sure that a year from now that that family member is still maybe residing at that residence. There's also the opportunity through inspections to go into the residence to ensure that the proper person is staying there. So we do have systems in place that already exist that we can utilize to fit what we're doing with the ADUs to make the enforcement side more clear and more streamlined. The other thing to mention when it comes to the ADUs is the design process. So while there's concerns about shanties being built in certain sizes of the building being a concern, there's a design process where, again, throughout the construction process and the design process, our planning department and other departments, I'm sure, will be reviewing said plans to, again, make sure that the plans that are being provided are plans that, again, fits into the neighborhood's aesthetic already. So that is already part of the process as a developer, builder. You want to make sure that the ADU that you're designing, one, fits the aesthetic of your street, your neighborhood, but also as a consideration to not maybe build as high depending on the need that you have for that ADU. All that information can be included in said application process so that we have this information on the owner as well as the potential tenant living there. Throughout the design process, we can also have information about parking information. So making sure that if the tenant who's living in the ADU does have a vehicle, that when the owner of said property fills out this application, that they provide the vehicle information, the license plate number, the name of the owner of the driver, to ensure that, again, if there is a neighborhood where parking is tight, there's a shortage, there's not sidewalks, that we, the city, can still be able to identify and keep track of said vehicles and information and who belongs there, if that's a concern. These are just some thoughts as we're having this conversation that came to me. I think overall the idea of the ADUs, while to other council members' point, may not be a significant increase to our housing stock, it's still very much a need. And for anyone who is able to develop, create ADUs, we're allowing this to happen in a lot of areas throughout the city to, again, allow flexibility, but also fairness as it relates to other comments in regards to redlining. So these are very much action items that I guess we could actively work towards including and having more conversations on. But I think the concern coming from neighbors and the concern coming from potential council members, I still believe that this is something that will benefit us, and I do trust our planning department as well as our codes department, if we do pass this, that this would be a legislation that we stay on top of to make sure that the outcome is what we are expecting or looking for. And if there's any adjustments as to any other legislation, we will be able to, again, follow along and address those concerns as they come up. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Councilman Adams. Councilmember Hoey.
Yeah, I just want to, my name was mentioned by the previous council member, Adams. We have a problem right now in the city, and I can't tell you how many times I've had neighbors come call me and say, you know, Councilman Hoey, we have somebody building another apartment in their house. And and we even heard about it from Trey when he was at the last meeting here, that there's stuff done illegally. There's been at least 30, throughout the city, and I know there's quite a few in my ward. So I talked to Rick LaJoy because I've had to call him in on this, and they don't know unless we tell them or somebody speaks up, and this stuff just happens. And God bless our codes department, but it could probably be a lot bigger. I mean, there should be a lot more inspections done. But one of the things that Rick had told me is if somebody does that, they maybe in a basement, they put a kitchen in, a bathroom, and then they get reported that they didn't have a permit to do this. I mean, they get hit with a $300 fine and a stop work order. But codes comes in and says, you can have this in there, but you can't have a separate, you can't cut it off from the main residence. So if there's a doorway between that new apartment that's built and the main residence, codes makes them take the doorway out, take the jamb out, because if you take the door off the hinges, they'll pop it back in. But my point is that we're depending on a small group. There's, I think, 35,000, Avi could probably tell me if I'm wrong or right, houses in the city. And we got a small, I think codes is like 8 or 9 people, and we're going to expect them to be able to inspect. I mean, I'd rather not take that chance. I'd rather make sure that when we get this legislation, that everything's in there, that we're not just assuming that this will happen, that'll happen, that we know what will happen. And that's what I'm arguing for, that let's make sure we get good legislation, not just rush, that, oh, we got to get this in now, there's a housing. We're talking about, Trey and to Rick LaJoy, they said to build an external building, at least $150,000. So I go out, I take a loan for $150,000 at 6% interest, and what am I going to rent it for? To make back my investment. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me. And again, I'm trying to be the voice of reason here. Let's make sure that we have something that's doable and that neighborhoods want. And as far as the redlining, I mean, I live on a block with 10 people, 10 houses, and 2 of the people are black. I mean, they were able to buy it. Again, I don't know every neighborhood. I know my block. I know around where I live. And, I don't know. I think using this to say that this is gonna make things get desegregated, I don't think this is the tool to do it, but that's my opinion.
Thank you, Councilmember Hoey. So at the last meeting, so we've had a few meetings on this topic. At the last meeting, we had several of our department heads here to give us their viewpoints, give us their concerns, give us their observations. I do believe that anyone who invests that type of resources, because to put an external, as it was shared, it'd be probably $150,000 to $200,000, is doing that not with the mentality of I'm going to rent this out and recoup those resources. I think if someone's going to put those type of resources, it's most likely someone who wants to live in a neighborhood that they've lived in for many years and is looking for an opportunity to have some of their family live with them, and either live with them, would they take their primary home and they move into the small unit, or would they move into the small unit and the family member moves into the small unit and they have their still main home that they've lived in. I don't see investors investing that type of money to build a unit, a small unit that's not going to bring in that type of revenue, when there's plenty of multi-unit properties in the city that are still on the market that they could pay and have a 3 or 4 bedroom apartment for a lot less than, 150. I mean, not really. I mean, I hate to say it, but, well, as a homeowner, I don't hate to say it, but property values are going up, and, a 3 unit is going, a 3 unit's going close to 350, 400, and a 2 unit's going close to, 250, 300. So you're paying between 125, 150 for a already made 2 unit that probably looks pretty good at that number. It's most likely a 3 bedroom that's going to be able to bring in more revenue than a 800 square foot studio. So I don't see the financial advantage for developers to come in and build these type of units. I see it more, in my perspective, and I know everyone has those own perspectives, and I respect everybody's perspectives. I see it more as it's going to be someone who's going to make that type of investment, someone who wants to stay in their neighborhood and looking to bring in some support to allow them to be able to stay in their neighborhoods. But again, that's my own personal perspective. However, I do want to allow any other council members if they want to share any more thoughts or any more questions. Councilmember Zema.
I just wanted to make sure that we were aware. I think Councilmember Anani referenced the New York State grant program, that there's millions of dollars that are being dispersed to communities to municipalities that are adopting an ADU program that it's $2 million per funding round. Homeowners low to middle income who meet all sorts of requirements can receive a grant of up to $125,000 outside of New York City. And that's, I think, the target population that we would want to help ease their housing issues. So I just wanted to make sure that we were all aware of that.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions by committee members? Any comments and questions by non-committee members? Okay. With that said, I am going to call for a vote. All those in favor of moving forward with ordinance
Don't you need a motion?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Is there a motion to move forward with a vote?
Make the motion to move forward with ordinance 68-121.24.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor to move forward with ordinance 68-121.24?
Aye.
Aye. All those against?
Nay.
All those abstained? Okay. Okay. I appreciate everybody's time on this. I do. I know a lot of people spend a lot of time on this, and trying to get some compromises.
Don't you have to note for the record whether it passed or not?
Oh, so it's three for, 1 nay, 1 abstain, so the bill passes today. So again, I thank everybody for their time on this, their time meeting, and the compromises that were made. So thank you all. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
All those in favor? Second? All those in favor?
Yeah, aye.